Hi, everybody. I'm April Cummings with Cayman Life TV, and joining me again for the second episode of EDBEAT is Patrick Brendel from CaymanCurrent.org. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, April. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're recording this on a Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. So there's been a lot going on already this week. What's on the plate? What's on the agenda?
Well, two words, inspection reports. The Office of Education Standards has been very busy publishing several reports on several schools, and there's been some surprises, and in a good way.
So John Gray High School is one of the two government schools for anyone who may be watching from somewhere else. And, sometimes it gets a bit of heat here and there. Good news isn't usually news, right? But today it is.
Right, and the good is the key word here, because John Gray High School has become the first mainstream public school in Cayman to get a good rating, which
So what
is
did,
the
sorry, Patrick. So just for folks, what does a good rating mean?
Well, in Cayman, the school inspectors rate the schools in more than a dozen individual categories, from teaching, learning, students' progress and attainment in English, math, science. And so they do it on a scale from weak to satisfactory. And satisfactory is the minimum legal standard for a school. Then good, which is where the government wants to get all the schools to be at the good rating. And then the top rating is excellent, which basically means no improvement needed.
Which is a rare thing, and I know we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's talk a little bit about the journey for John Gray. Why is this such a big deal?
Well, I think, first of all, John Gray is the biggest school in Cayman, either public or private. There's, I think at last count, 1,100 kids at John Gray. And just having that many kids in this age group is a challenge, because these are kids from year 7 up through year 11. And as everybody knows, one more teenagers. So John Gray is it's been a challenge over the years, but it's also been seen as a big opportunity. And there's been a lot of there's been hurdles, but there's been a lot of positive progress, starting basically when the principal, John Clark, took over a few years ago. So I think for him, this is kind of the culmination of what he's been trying to do over the past 4 or 5 years.
So I do a feature, which you've seen, Patrick, called Classroom of the Month. And we've been to John Gray quite a few times to do features on classrooms. Now, I'm going to be honest, this series is about positivity, right? So we're, of course, looking for that great moment. But every time I have gone to John Gray, every time I see a principal who's really engaged, who could give me 17 amazing stories just as he walks down the hallway. He knows what the students are doing. He knows where they need work. He's got strong relationships with them and cares very much for them. And it is an interesting example from my perspective of seeing this leadership come from the top. You know that no one individual can do this in a school, but having strong leadership really does seem to help. What are your thoughts on kind of what he's done or what they have done together that it has gotten them to this point?
Well, we sat down with actually one of our first interviews that we did with the Current last year was with Principal Clark, and I think it was either a 2 or 3-parter. So we had a good hour-long conversation about the kind of mindset that he's instilling in the leaders in the school, and they talk about this in the inspection report. And the leadership can come, as you said, from the top, but it also comes from the students. So this latest report had a lot of praise for the leadership and the examples being set by, for example, the student prefects. It's also at John Gray with a viewpoint shift in terms of focusing on discipline and behavior, and less of this idea of a school being almost like a prison waiting to happen and trying to punish bad behavior, as in, let's address the behavior before it gets serious, because what they're there to do at the high school is learn. They're a place to learn, and this negative, distracting behavior gets in the way of the learning. So it's a more proactive, positive approach to discipline and behavior issues. And as you know, in the press and in the social media lately,
Mhm.
um, I think last fall there was the incident with the John Gray fight clubs, and then recently with the students' viral video talking about adult topics. Um,
Diplomatically
but
said.
yes,
Diplomatically said.
but I think if you look at the statistics and we have is it's showing a steady and significant decline in this kind of negative behavior that would result in things like expulsions. So a lot of these headlines get grabbed by these singular incidents, which you don't want to make light of things because they are serious on as far as the individual student is concerned, and you have to address it. But some of this is kids just making mistakes. So as a whole, I think you can see that the behavior in the school has really improved over the past few years, which frees up the opportunity for more learning to take place. And that's either contributed to or going hand in hand with significantly improved test scores, which is also noted in the inspection report.
So, it is interesting how, as you've said, a few truly, negative headlines can overshadow the good work that the kids at the school are doing in many, many areas. And that is something that I've heard from them frequently, a sense of frustration that this incident, whatever it may be, overshadows all the other things that they've been doing well. And, it's not that we don't praise our young people when they're doing well. We do, but it doesn't get the same kind of viral activity that something negative does. I think it's interesting, though, that the principal, John Clark, has been, I would say, relatively forthcoming about addressing some of those things publicly, which does help, from my perspective, to diffuse some of the steam that would get built up around it. I'm not saying that he's minimizing the events or anything. I'm just saying that because he's willing to speak about them and as carefully as possible address that it's being handled, it is easier for it to pass through the news cycle and the emphasis go back, for them at least, to doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, which is really learning.
I think that's absolutely right. And just from a purely public relations perspective, it takes a little bit of courage to kind of complete that story cycle on that narrative arc where there's something wrong happening at the high school and then it starts to blow up, and then somebody needs to step in and fill the information gap and say, yes, we're aware of it, we're taking it seriously, we've taken measures to address it,
Mhm.
and the story is now over. And then people go on to the next thing, and they're more or less satisfied.
So the areas of improvement, as I'm understanding it, there were there was improvement across the board.
Correct. The inspector's language was almost all aspects of the school have improved since the last inspection. And John Gray wasn't actually starting from rock bottom a few years ago. I think the last inspection was 2018, but I could be wrong, because they were a
Yeah.
satisfactory school. And along with Lehman Scott, they were two of the secondary schools that did achieve a satisfactory rating. So they weren't subject to things like follow through inspections. So they improved from kind of this minimum expected level up to the national level of expectation. And they improved, as I said, in almost all areas. There's some things that they can't improve in. And let's say the physical facilities, as you've said, you've been there, you've seen what it's
Mhm.
like. It's very crowded, it's very old, it's very disjointed. Um, I know one of the big topics in education is the gigantic capital works project going on next door, which is the
Mhm.
$170 million new John Gray project, which will also include SciFec and some playing fields. And I know that Principal Clark and I think just about everybody is very excited about when this new school opens. It's going to address a lot of issues, even in terms of learning and behavior, that are kind of foisted on them by the physical campus that exists.
I mean, yeah, it is kind of like it grew up around itself, so it's a bunch of rabbit warrens in many respects. And interestingly enough, the students, the staff, the teachers, parents, community, everyone was involved in working through the components of the design of the new school, which, if nothing else, it creates a sense of engagement and pride, I think, in what comes next. So you can't just do the campus and not deal with the issues internally, but they've been working on the internal issues. So it will be really interesting to see if that change in physical environment will have the impact that they're hoping it will. Because I really think that they feel that it will just give them a boost to the next level that they need and believe that the students deserve.
Correct. And I think it comes down to this: we want to offer world class. We want to be a world class school, so having a world class building really helps. But you don't want to minimize the fundamental um, downsides to the existing campus, just in terms of simple things like getting from one class to another when it's raining and
Yeah.
therefore flooding.
Yeah.
So
And I mean, look, I walked uphill in 100-degree heat with a baked potato or something, back in my day. No AC. I went to Savannah Primary. Trust me, it was not the easiest of times. But I also will point out that the classroom, just the overall student body was much smaller as well. So over time, it's become increasingly difficult to manage. And we're dealing also with a different generation of students who have a lot of pressure on them that's far different from the pressures that I faced back in my time. So I really do hope this is positive for them. And I think getting this report card, if you will, is kind of a boost. One caveat though, and you mentioned this because we kind of do an email exchange ahead of time before we talk. Um, COVID did have an impact on how students learned, right? So student attainment is what? Basically how they've been doing on their exams. So what does this report cover in terms of student attainment?
well, it looks at there's 6 different categories actually. So 3 involve student attainment. So that's basically your exam scores and how well the students do in math, science, and English. And then the twin categories to those are student progress in English, math, and science. So not only how good did the students do at the end of the year, but how did they do compared to the previous year or as they're progressing through the system. And the thing about the 2020 CXC exams is they were graded a little bit differently with a little bit different weighting put on uh, written versus teacher assessments. So in Cayman, there was a large jump in the year 11 and year 12 exam scores, which is one of the main measures they use to judge student attainment and progress. And so even when the Ministry of Education came out with their report on the CXC scores, they cautioned that you can't it really take maybe a whole salt shaker when trying to compare the exam scores from 2020 to previous years. So what I'm looking out for is this year and next year is was this just a temporary uptick in the exam scores based on how they graded them and how they took them, or
Mhm.
what is this actually a positive trend?
And it will be difficult to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges because we have the food analogies here. It, just because there are so many variables that we've seen over the past couple of years. No, pre-COVID, COVID, and then post-COVID, if you will. You know, sometimes it's not just that the circumstances are changing, but that it can be stressful or difficult for students to manage their way and navigate through some of that stuff. And so, I can be a little bit hard sometimes when I'm looking at just the numbers, but I think you have to bear in mind that this has been a challenging, and I swore I was not going to say the word challenging anymore, but it's been a challenging period for everyone, and in particular our students as well. So, I do think, yes, we need to keep looking and evaluating on an ongoing basis, but it will be important to bear in mind that there have been some extenuating circumstances this past 2 years that I think most people didn't ever, see coming, unless they were, like me and super paranoid about her science fiction as a kid. Other than that, I don't think anyone was expecting it. One more thing, there have been some changes, though, at the Department of Education Standards, right? Or the Office of Education Standards, I should say, because
Yes.
Peter Carpenter, who was there from essentially the beginning, right, as I recall, is no longer there. So there's just some new leadership there.
Yes, so Peter was basically in charge of the office when they put together this current inspection regime. So they spent 3 years inspecting all the schools in this standardized way, and they call that the first cycle of inspections. And then and Peter left at about the end of 2020, and they started the second cycle of inspections in January. And I've been trying to get an update from the government for months on who is or was going to be the new director of OES, and it's been kind of an open secret because the inspectors have been inspecting schools, but actually got a press release from a preschool yesterday, and they mentioned that the school had been visited by the new director named Nicholas Sheriff. So we'll be trying to track down the new sheriff over the next few days, now that we have some sort of confirmation.
Because there's a new sheriff in town. See?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Okay, there was a bit of bonus news, and I know we're out of time, but there was a bit of bonus news, as you've called it, for Lighthouse School. They did well.
Yes. So the first, just to be brief, in the first cycle of inspections, Lighthouse School, which, as many people know, is serves specifically students with moderate to profound special education needs. They were the only government school to get a good rating in the first cycle of inspections. And in the second cycle, they're inspected again. They improved in certain areas and they got another good rating. So good for them.
That's great news. The final kind of component of that was that Montessori by the Sea and Little Trotters, they both got excellent scores.
Yes. So Montessori by the Sea, which has early years education up through primary, and then Little Trotters, which just has early years, they've kind of blown away the test curve. Little Trotters was the only school in Cayman to get an excellent in the first cycle of inspections, and they've gotten another excellent rating. And furthermore, they've got an excellent in every single one of the individual categories, which I believe is 14 for Little Trotters. And it's for Montessori by the Sea, got an excellent in all 18 areas because they're assessed a little differently because they have older students. So
Right.
these schools got perfect scores on their inspections. So they've really set the bar as high as it can go. And until they make the inspections tougher, you just cannot do better than Montessori by the Sea and Little Trotters have done. And of course, the staff is all really excited about that,
Love that.
because they both, Montessori by the Sea had a good rating and Little Trotters had an excellent rating, and they still took really seriously the recommendations
Mhm.
from the first cycle, and they worked really hard at it. And, kudos to them, A++ performance.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think these sorts of inspections and stuff they can be a little bit traumatic for teachers. Scrutiny is important, but it's still a stressful and difficult period. And they could have just coasted on the "we're good, we're fine," but the fact that they actually dug in and pushed to improve all the areas, it's a great sign, and it's really good to hear that.
Yes, and the thing about Little Trotters and other schools that score very highly on these inspections is, one thing the inspectors actually consider is how well they're giving back to the education community in terms of opening their schools for tours from other educators actually going out to other schools and teaching them about the things that they do at their schools um, that have gotten them praise. So there's a really kind of teaching moments happening and sharing the knowledge. So when these two schools are doing so well, it's actually has good benefit for the other schools as well. And ultimately, it's all about the kids, of course.
Fantastic. Okay, so I know we're going to wrap it up right now. Just wanted to let people know that they can catch all of your amazing coverage about education at caymancurrent.org. You've got a lot going on this week. There's a ton to talk about, and I'm sure a few things more will happen as the week goes on. Anything you want to say before we wrap things up?
No, just thanks for working on EDBEAT with me, and thanks for the opportunity. And everybody, thanks for liking and watching and sharing. And I hope this only gets better and grows from here.
And of course, don't forget to send us ideas, especially Patrick, because he does the real work. I just ask him a lot of questions for stories, things that you think he should cover, issues, but also celebration moments. And of course, I should say this as well. If there is a classroom that you want to nominate for coverage for Classroom of the Month, just email classroom@caymanlife.tv, and we'll definitely throw it in the ring for consideration, because to be frank, it is one of the best things I do with my month is to go visit a classroom and see how the students are progressing, what they're learning, and what they've achieved. And they don't all have to be A+ students all the time, or A star is what it is in the other system, isn't it? It's just really seeing a development and growth, and because education's a spectrum, it's a journey. So thanks again, everybody. I know awkwardly, I don't know what to do at the end.
Yeah, Miss
All right,
Cayman
cool.
wave.